Some nights the forest doesn't just whisper, it remembers. That was the thought that came to Eleanor as the wind slipped softly through the pine branches and tapped gently at the round window pane of the cabin. The fire in the hearth had faded into a bed of glowing embers, casting amber shadows that flickered like tired dances across the wooden floor. She sat quietly in her favorite chair by the fire, a thick blanket wrapped around her shoulders and a nearly empty cup of tea cooling in her hands. Outside, the forest lay still beneath a veil of fog, silver threads curling around the trunks of tall trees and rising slowly toward the moonlit sky. Eleanor wasn't sure what had stirred her from her rest. Perhaps it was the dream she had just left behind, a soft one, filled with light and laughter and the scent of pine and cinnamon. Or maybe it was something else, something older, something familiar. The cabin was exactly as her grandfather had left it. Wooden beams above lined with dried herbs and feathers tied in twine. A shelf of dusty books leaned against the far wall, many of which she had once begged him to read aloud. She remembered curling up beside him on winter nights, her head resting on his shoulder as his voice floated through the room like warm honey. But it was the brass lantern that drew her attention now. It hung silently on its hook beside the door, just where it had always been. Its metal glinted softly in the low firelight, dulled by years of soot and memory. She hadn't touched it since the funeral, not out of fear, but out of reverence. To light it again felt sacred. She stood slowly, letting the blanket fall from her shoulders. The air inside the cabin was cool and still. Her slippers padded softly across the floor as she approached the lantern, her heart quietly echoing in her chest. With trembling fingers, she lifted it from its place and carried it to the small wooden table beside the door. The box of matches sat where it always had, tucked beside the window's edge. She struck one. The flame flared to life with a gentle hiss, and for a moment it illuminated the quiet of the cabin, the books, the fireplace, the small wooden carvings on the mantel. Everything felt close and far away all at once. She touched the match to the wick. And then the lantern bloomed. A soft golden light filled the space, warm and steady, not harsh or bright, just enough to soften the room and call forward the past. It was like breathing in a memory. She stepped outside. The door creaked quietly behind her as she pushed it open, and the forest greeted her with open arms. The mist had thickened, wrapping around the trees like a shawl, but the lantern carved a gentle path ahead, its glow dancing lightly along her boots crunched faintly on the mossy path, the air around her thick with the scent of rain-damp earth and fallen leaves. Each step seemed to quiet her thoughts, as if the forest itself were taking them from her, tucking them away between tree roots and under soft moss. It was like walking through a story, and every turn of the path whispered her name. The deeper she walked into the woods, the more the quiet settled, not just around her, but within her. The lantern in Eleanor's hand cast a soft halo that drifted with her like an old companion. The trees, tall and ancient, stood like guardians with outstretched arms, their leaves gently rustling, as if they were sharing secrets she was finally ready to hear. She passed the crooked birch where she had once built a fairy house from bark and moss. A bit of the tiny door still clung to the tree's roots, worn smooth by time and weather. She smiled. It was silly now, perhaps, but not foolish. Because here, in this forest, imagination lasted. Here, even forgotten things were remembered. The brook came into view, its voice steady and kind, like someone humming under their breath while doing something comforting. The moonlight kissed the surface of the water, and for a moment, Eleanor just stood and watched the current wind its way through the dark like a ribbon threading between moments. And then, just as before, she saw it. A second. Light. just beyond the stream, past the willow that draped its branches like a sleeping giant's arms. It didn't surprise her this time. If anything, it felt like something expected, something hoped for. The same gentle glow she had seen before, waiting, not beckoning urgently, but patiently, like a memory waiting to be felt. She crossed the brook on the flat stepping stones worn into place long ago. The water murmured beneath her, never rising, never rushing, only flowing. The second light drifted deeper into the trees, pausing now and then, as if to make sure she was still following. And she was. Step by step, Eleanor let herself be led. The forest changed around her, not darker but older. The air here felt thick with stories, the ground soft with centuries of fallen leaves. Her lantern swayed in time with her steps, and the second light pulsed just ahead, a slow and steady rhythm that made her heartbeat match its pace. Then, at the bend in the path, she saw it again. The bench. The one her grandfather had built with his own hands, using wood from a fallen pine he'd once called the Gentle Giant. She remembered helping him sand it smooth, her tiny fingers brushing the grain, watching him work with quiet joy. It looked almost untouched. Moss had crept along the edges. A few pine needles lay scattered across the seat, but it still stood firm, rooted in the earth, as if it belonged more to the forest than to any one person. The second light hovered For a long moment she didn't sit. She just stood and let the quiet of the place settle around her like a warm shawl. Her heart was no longer aching. It was full of the forest, full of memory, full of something she couldn't quite name, but didn't need to. Then she sat down. The bench creaked softly beneath her, a sound that felt like the forest sighing with recognition. The lantern in her hand rested on the wood beside her, its light flickering gently. The second light, still glowing, hovered a short distance away. She didn't speak. There was no need. The silence between her and the woods was not empty. It was rich, woven with thoughts, feelings, echoes. It was a kind of silence that let you feel instead of speak. And so she let herself feel. She remembered the stories, how her grandfather used to sit right here, pouring tea from a dented thermos into 2 enamel mugs, how he told her tales about glowing creatures that lived just beneath the bark of trees, about owls that knew the names of the stars, about the light that lived in all of us and how sometimes it wandered a little before it found its way home. She used to think they were just bedtime tales, but now she wasn't so sure, because here she was, sitting on a bench that time hadn't taken, beside a lantern that remembered her touch, staring into a light that felt like more than fire. She closed her eyes. The forest breathed around her. She could feel it, not just hear it or smell it or see it, but feel it, in her chest, in her breath, in the way the wind stirred her hair and the way the bench seemed to cradle her. Her grandfather was here, not in body, but in everything, in the moss beneath her feet, in the hush of the trees, in the light beside her. A tear slipped down her cheek, not from sadness, but from peace. She had not come here looking for answers. She had come for rest. But the forest, in its old quiet way, had given her both. Time passed, though it felt like none had. The second light dimmed just slightly, resting near the base of the bench now. Eleanor reached toward it, not to grab it, not to own it, just to acknowledge it. And for the briefest second, warmth touched her fingertips. Not heat, warmth, like a hand she remembered holding, like the softness of a wool scarf wrapped around her on a snowy day, like the light that lives in old stories and soft places. She breathed in. And when she exhaled, it felt like she was letting go of something she hadn't realized she was carrying. She rested her head back against the bench. The trees arched above her, their leaves brushing the sky like lace. Moonlight poured through in delicate silver threads, and the wind hummed a lullaby in a key older than any song. She could stay here forever, or maybe just for tonight. That would be enough. The wind shifted slightly. and with it came the faint scent of cinnamon and cedar, so subtle it might have only existed in memory. Eleanor kept her eyes closed, the bench beneath her gently cradling her weight like it had been carved with her in mind. Somewhere nearby, an owl called, its deep, rounded voice echoing once through the branches, and just beyond that, silence. But not a hollow silence, a full one, the kind that hums beneath your skin and makes your heart slow down. She didn't need to open her eyes to know that the second light was still there. She could feel it. It was a presence, not just a thing, not something to explain, but something to accept. Her grandfather's voice came to her again, floating up from the well of years gone by. Some lights, sweetheart, don't come from fire. They come from love. And that kind of light doesn't go out when you leave a room. It waits. She didn't know whether he'd actually said it aloud, or if it was something her heart remembered, but either way, it was true. The lantern still glowed softly beside her. The second light remained near the roots of the pine tree ahead, swaying lightly, as if nodding with each breeze. And Eleanor stayed still, the mist cooling her cheeks, her shawl pulled close as the forest pressed closer. Not intrusively, but protectively. She let her mind wander back to the summers she had spent here, the days full of blackberry-stained fingers and sun-warmed river stones, the long twilight walks where she asked too many questions and he answered everyone with a story. Not all of them were true, she knew that now, but they were true enough. They were gentle truths, the kind that plant wonder in the child's heart and leave it there to grow like ivy. The trees talk when we're quiet, he'd once whispered, crouched beside her under the canopy of a stormy night. You just have to be still enough to hear them. She had laughed back then, thought it was just a game, but now, in the depth of this fog-covered night, on the edge of something that felt holy, she believed him. The trees were speaking, and she, finally, had learned how to listen. There was a stillness in her she hadn't known in years, a soft unraveling, like the knots she had carried inside, of grief, of loneliness, of trying to be strong for too long, were slowly coming loose, one by one. Here, in this forest, with only 2 lanterns and a bench as witness, she let herself rest. For the first time, in what felt like decades, she wasn't trying to hold anything together. She didn't need to be brave, or clever, or composed. She didn't even need to be awake. Not really. And yet, she stayed. Because it wasn't just sleep she was finding here. It was return. After a while, she stood, slowly, carefully, as though waking from a dream she didn't want to disturb. Her legs tingled from sitting so long, but she didn't mind. Everything about her movements felt gentle, deliberate, as if the forest had slowed time just for her. She picked up the brass lantern. Its handle was warm. The second light began to drift again, not away, but deeper, as though there was still more to remember, still more to feel. Eleanor followed. They didn't take the usual path this time. The trail meandered in soft, curling loops, past places she didn't remember walking as a child, small clearings with moss-covered stones, low-hanging branches like curtains, framing doorways to forgotten corners of the forest. The trees began to change, subtly. The pines gave way to older, broader oaks. Some twisted into the sky with knotted limbs like weathered hands, while others bowed low, branches sweeping the earth. Ferns grew thick along the path, and beneath her boots, the ground felt spongy, layered with years upon years of fallen leaves. The forest seemed to be showing her something, not in words, not even in vision, but in feeling. She stopped beside a tree she didn't recognize. It was Matt. She gasped softly, not from fear, but recognition. She remembered this, vaguely. Her grandfather had carved animals and tucked them into the woods, little tokens of stories they'd shared. Back then, she thought it was a treasure hunt, a game. But now, seeing it again, she realized it had always been more. He was planting memories, little anchors to remind her, long after he was gone, that magic doesn't leave when people do. She picked up the fox gently and smiled. Its edges were weathered, but its spirit remained. She brushed a finger along its back and whispered, "Thank you," and then continued on. The second light paused now and then, letting her catch up, waiting with the patience of something that lived outside of time. It glowed softer now, not weaker, just more subtle, as though it knew she didn't need guiding anymore, just company. They reached a grove. She hadn't known it existed. It was perfectly round, ringed with white birch trees whose leaves shimmered faintly in the moonlight. The ground was soft, with wild grass and blue flowers she didn't have a name for. The second light floated to the center and stilled. Eleanor stepped into the clearing, breath held. The air here felt different, lighter, older, sacred. She sat in the grass, the lantern beside her. The flowers swayed around her knees. Above, the stars peeked through the branches, blinking slowly, as though they too had stories to tell, but were waiting their turn. Here, there was no memory of sorrow, only presence, only now. Eleanor lay back, looking up through the trees. Her heart was quiet, her breath was deep, and inside her, something glowed, something long buried, something warm. She thought of her grandfather, and for the first time since his passing, she didn't feel the ache of his absence. She felt his nearness. The stars above blinked softly through the canopy, their light delicate and distant. Eleanor lay in the tall grass of the grove, surrounded by white birch trees and those mysterious, nameless blue flowers. The petals glowed faintly under the moonlight, as though storing a secret kind of light. She had never seen this grove before, or maybe she had. Maybe it had only shown itself to those who were ready to stop rushing, ready to feel. The lantern beside her flickered gently, and the second light, her companion through the forest, hovered just overhead, now pulsing in rhythm with her breath. Not guiding, not leading, simply being. There was no wind here, and yet the branches above moved, slowly swaying like lullaby dancers. Time in this grove wasn't the same. It didn't count by minutes or hours, but by moments. And every moment was full. Eleanor didn't speak, and the forest didn't answer with words, but there was a kind of conversation unfolding nonetheless, a quiet exchange between her memories and the ground beneath her, between the ache she had carried and the comfort that surrounded her now. She thought again of her grandfather's stories, tales of old forest spirits that lived in the spaces between breath and silence. He used to say, "There are places the world forgets on purpose because they're not meant for the world, they're meant for hearts that need them." And she knew now this grove was one of those places, a forest's hidden heart, a sanctuary stitched from time and tenderness. Eleanor closed her eyes and let her body relax completely into the grass. The moss beneath her softened her spine, the flowers cradled her arms. Her shawl was still wrapped around her, smelling faintly of wood smoke and lavender. Sleep tugged at the edges of her mind, not as something forced, but as something offered, gently, lovingly. She let herself drift, not away from the moment, but deeper into it, and in that in-between space, just before dreams began to form their shapes, she saw something. A memory, not sharp like a photograph, but soft like a lantern's glow. She was 7, sitting at this very grove, only now realizing it. Her grandfather beside her, his hand wrapped around hers. She remembered his voice, low and calm, telling her about the birch trees. "These trees," he whispered, "they don't forget anything. They hold the sound of every laugh, every tear, every story told under their branches." And then he had tapped one of the trunks. "Tell her something nice," he smiled. And she had leaned forward and whispered shyly, "I hope you're happy forever." The tree had rustled, as if it heard. And now here in this same grove, decades later, she whispered it again, only this time to herself, "I hope you're happy forever." And the forest answered with silence. And the forest answered with silence. The warm kind, the kind that wraps itself around your shoulders like a thick-knit blanket, the kind that presses gently behind your eyes and lets you cry, not because you're broken, but because something inside you finally feels safe. Tears slip down her cheeks, quiet ones, cleansing ones. She didn't try to wipe them away. Minutes passed, or hours, she couldn't tell. Eventually, the second light moved again, just slightly, toward the other side of the grove, not urging her, just letting her know it was time. Eleanor sat up slowly, brushed the grass from her shawl, and picked up the lantern again. She followed. The path on this side of the grove was narrower and lined with trees that arched overhead like a gentle tunnel. Soft fern fronds brushed against her calves. Somewhere, high above, a night bird chirped once, then was quiet. The second light paused again, this time beside a small wooden post. She stopped in front of it. It was an old sign, hand-carved. The letters were worn, but you could still make them out. "Return when your heart is ready." Her breath caught, because it was the same phrase that was written inside her grandfather's journal, the one he'd left on the bedside table before he passed. She never understood what it meant until now. This wasn't just a forest trail. This wasn't just a dream. This was his path, and now it was hers too. She stepped forward, past the sign, and came into another small clearing. This one held only one thing, a tree stump, smooth and round like a seat, and a worn leather satchel resting on top. The second light hovered directly above it. She approached slowly. Inside the satchel, wrapped in soft cloth, was a small wooden box. She opened it. Inside were tiny paper scrolls, bundled with twine. Each one was labeled in his handwriting. "For when you miss me, for when you need courage, for when the world feels too loud, for when you forget how much I loved you." Her hands trembled. She pulled the last one gently and unrolled it. Inside, written in neat but fading script, were just a few words. "You found the light, Eleanor. You always had it." She sat down on the tree stump and held the note to her chest. The lantern beside her flickered. The second light, her guide, began to dim. Not disappear, just soften. Its work was done. Eleanor tilted her face upward. The night sky above was open now, stars blinking. Eleanor sat on the stump for a long time, her grandfather's note held close to her chest. The quiet around her was the kind that wrapped itself around you gently, not empty, but whole. The second light hovered patiently nearby, dimmer now, as if it knew its work was nearly done. She took a slow breath. Everything in her felt softer, not just calm, but rearranged, like the forest had pulled out the tangled knots inside her, laid them flat, and helped her make sense of them. She rose. The light shifted forward. Eleanor followed the path through the trees, though now she needed no guidance. The second light floated ahead like a quiet companion, not leading, just with her. The woods no longer felt like something she had entered, they felt like something she belonged to. Soon, the familiar grove of birch trees came into view. She paused beneath their white limbs, leaves whispering above like lullabies. Her fingers brushed one of the trunks and she whispered, "Thank you." The breeze answered softly, brushing her cheek like a hand. Then the light, her guide, her comfort, began to rise. Slowly it drifted upward, higher and higher, until it melted into the silver strands of moonlight, vanishing into the sky. Eleanor didn't feel loss, not this time. It wasn't gone, it was part of the forest now. She walked the rest of the way back to the cabin in silence. Her lantern cast long, soft shadows, lighting the mossy stones, the curled ferns, the edge of the brook. She crossed it with steady steps, feeling something inside her settle with every footfall. The cabin appeared between the trees, its windows warm with waiting. She stepped onto the porch and opened the door. Inside, nothing had changed. The blanket still draped over the rocker, the teacup by the fire, the gentle glow of embers. She hung the lantern on its hook. It gave one last flicker, then rested. She changed into her nightgown, brushed her hair slowly, and pulled the thick quilt over her shoulders. The room smelled of cedar and sleep. Through the round window, the stars blinked down between the trees, and in the silence she smiled. Not because everything was solved, but because everything made sense now. As her eyes closed, she felt the presence of something beside her, not visible, not loud, but familiar, not guiding anymore, just with her, always had been, always would be.